Ba 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 ba.
Good day and welcome. I'm Joey, and this is Orange D20. Because I just finished a campaign for one of the Dungeons and Dragons groups I run for, the idea of what to do at the end of a campaign is really on the front of my mind right now. So today's episode is going to be some ideas around what you should do to end your campaign, mostly based on what I did the last time I ended one of mine. The first thing I recommend is to begin some level of planning early on. For this game, we had played through the Curse of Strahd module, and as the group was planning their attack on Castle Ravenloft, I was looking at what we would do after. I decided that I was enjoying these characters and wanted to see more of them, so I wanted to take them all the way to level 20. If you're a new game master, this would be a pretty ambitious idea. I've been doing it for nearly 30 years, so I tend to aim big. If this is your first campaign, I'd say maybe plan for the next tier, levels 1 through 4, or what you're going to do from levels 5 to 10. That doesn't mean you can't get to level 20, but I would say you should plan the next chapter of your story. And then, once you reach that ending, plan your next story. I also wanted to start thinking about the challenges that I wanted the characters to deal with by the end of the game. For this group, I knew I wanted them to fight against something like a god, perhaps a devil lord or a demon prince. The god would be a secret mastermind that would show up near the very end of the game, and they would have to fight something that was huge and epic on a visual standpoint, in part because this is the first time we'd taken a Dungeons and Dragons campaign all the way to 20th level, and I wanted to make sure that they got the most out of getting the chance to play those really powerful characters. I'm always concerned about ensuring player choice does matter. So for this game, I actually had in the back of my mind two potential final bosses. Lolth, the demon prince of the Drow, or Maglubiet. Maglubiet, the chief goblin god. Both of these bosses would want to destroy the characters, but they also want to destroy each other. The choices the characters are going to make over the second half of the campaign are going to determine which god's minions are taken out first and who they're going to have to face at the very end of the game. Then I start thinking about those minions. I want the Drow to be more of an external threat, something coming up from down below. And I start coming up with a Drow ruling council with different members with their own agendas. For Maglubiet, I decide that the goblins aren't threatening enough on their own. I mean, once you get to 10th level, your PCs are going to walk through most goblin encounters. So I decided to give him a warlock who was manipulating the Solarian Empire from within. That warlock story becomes more of a political thriller, and sometimes his goals are aligned with the characters, he needs them to succeed at something, but sometimes in his service to the goblin god, he needs them to fail and is actively working against them. I start planning out these villains and sub-villains in advance so I can start thinking about their different plans and motivations, and have hints of what they're doing show up early on. The characters start seeing iron spider brooches throughout the Imperial City very early on. They also come across Lord Samwell Torrhen, who can help them out with certain things, but obviously has a strong agenda he isn't entirely sharing. I want to know who the big movers and shakers are so I can start deciding what they want and who they work through. Often throughout the stories that are more human-centric, they would run into characters who would eventually be revealed to be working with Lord Samwell Torrhen, and they came to trust him less and less as time went on. With the Drow, they knew they could never trust anyone who was outright Drow, but they also knew that there was always a chance to play them against each other, mostly because these are experienced players who have come across the Drow before and know that plotting against each other is a big part of any story involving the Drow. While I'm planning the villains, I'm also planning the characters' allies. This group had a large number of divine casters, and as I was thinking of the set piece fight for the end of the game, I thought it would be awesome to have an angel on the side of the characters, fighting with them against the evil god. But I don't want that to feel cheap or unearned when it happens. So I decide that while the players are escaping from Barovia, they're going to see a shooting star heading directly towards them. It's Sariel, the guardian angel who is the magic source of the party's cleric, ranger, and paladin's divine casting. However, she has expended most of her power breaking down the barriers that have locked them in the Shadowfell. While she is technically a Solar, she is weakened. I statted her out in her lesser form as an Aasimar Celestial Warlock, and she's technically her own patron. She also doesn't have the form of her giant Solar. While she could regain it, she currently looks more like a human or an Aasimar. Her power is invested in the PCs. When they need her, any of the divine casters can lend her levels, where they become weakened. Also, if they cast any spells that have a spiritual effect, something like Summon Celestial, the spell slot brings forth more of her essence, and any celestial spirit they call forth, like a divine guardian or the celestial they summon, looks like her, even if the stats I'm using for it are from some other lesser celestial being. She is part of the party from 10th level on as a supporting NPC. Part of the reason I bring her in so early is so that they're invested in her. They go to her for advice, lend her levels so she can help them craft magic items, and assist them in emergencies. It also means that they're concerned about her, even when I give control of her to them in the final fight in her full Solar form. They do not want her to die. She is important to them because she's been around so long, and they don't want to lose her either. Her life is something that has inherent value, and they won't throw her away like they would if it was, say, a lesser summon spell. I already know, just from knowing my players, that when the cleric gets his level 20th ability to use Divine Inspiration once a week, he's going to have Sariel restored so that she'll be available within that final fight against Lolth or Moguliep. I also start introducing more allies into the story before they need them. A general who they can trust starts interacting with them before they ever need to ask for any of those armies. The princess that is their patron in the imperial courts is there at parties when they first reach the capital, so she doesn't suddenly appear when it's most convenient. And when she arrives near the end of the game to lend legitimacy to what they're doing, they're expecting her as she's one of their closest allies. The allies I want for the end start showing up early so that there can be a full relationship when it comes to that final fight. They also get choices on who they're going to work with. They spurn some of the potential allies or just ignored them. I give them choices for what I might want, but I let them choose if they want the Archcardinal's support, or maybe the support of a different patron within the Imperial family, or if they want the trophy hunter who goes after monsters to be one of their closest allies. They probably won't be able to get everyone on side, but I'm giving them options for who's going to be in their story. They may have to deal with some people they hate as allies, but I always want that hate to be an interesting hate and a choice. Even though I don't like this person, what they bring to the table is worth enough that I'll put up with the things I don't like about them. So I've started planting both the enemies and the allies early on, and I keep mixing and remixing them to find stories. If the Drow do something, what effect does it have on one of their allies, and how do they get involved? When the Warlock does something, who does he bring to bear, and does he try and convert any of their allies to his side? Especially for the Warlock, they've got some shared allies, so at some points they have to wonder, can I still trust this person? As I'm doing this mixing and remixing, the group quickly shows much more interest in a war with the Drow than the traitor in the court storyline. So I decide to have Lord Torn taken out of the picture first. I plan some games that are going to happen before the very end of the campaign that will end up dealing with him. I also start building up the danger of Lolth before her eventual appearance. Statues of her look like the party rogue, and the Drow have a special name for her. To make sure the stakes are high enough, the Drow actually get the drop on them once or twice and manage to soundly beat the party, with them mostly escaping with their lives. They start looking specifically for ways to depower the Drow, to have them infight or to take away sources of their strength. Meanwhile, the Drow are trying to do the same thing to them, trying to identify and eliminate their alliances, trying to find ways to weaken the party. So I wouldn't recommend this for every enemy, but the nature of the Drow made me feel comfortable that when these characters started showing up as movers and shakers in the world, Drow spies were studying them and noticed how much radiant damage they were doing. The Drow started preparing for this with rings of resistance against radiant damage because they knew who they'd be fighting. Not every major enemy the characters come across should have this, and lots of the demons from the very, very final fight of the game didn't have it, but lots of the Drow High Council did because they were worried about this specific group of characters who had shown their animosity standing specifically in their way. It's the same way that when your group's looking to fight a red dragon, they start looking for items that will give them resistance to fire damage. Smart NPCs will be doing the same thing, but they have to be the sort of smart NPCs and monsters that have a reason to A, know this about the character, and B, have the means to actually make some kind of preparations against what they do know about the characters. They shouldn't be able to read the sheet, and they didn't see all of their adventures, so you have to do a little bit of a thought experiment. What does what the characters have done look like from the bad guy's side? And let them prepare based on that. As we were getting towards the final game, I start looking at the outstanding plot threads. I need to answer the mystery of why Rhea is called the Chrysalid. Sariel needs to be restored to her final form. The Necromancer King of Kol needs to make his final agenda known. The enemies that are still active and not yet dealt with need to amass against the players. I start planning my final games around what will answer these questions so that this story will be completed when we're done. For the very last session, I also planned some really tough encounters. I want the players to run through almost every power they have and use every item they've amassed. I want them to feel like they've just skimmed by. This can be really tough for newer game masters. There are some great sleight of hand tricks on how you can rebalance an encounter midway. I've learned a lot of this from a Matthew Colville video, and I'll link that above. You're going to need to think about some of the more mechanical aspects of these fights, like the action economy and the damage output, in order to make sure that they are challenging but don't destroy your characters, and figure out how to adjust on the fly. Even with a bunch of experience, you'll get this wrong. One of the encounters I planned for this session should have been a match for 8 level 20 characters, based on the math and the challenge rating in the books. And I threw it at 3 level 20 PCs. However, this fight was heavily stocked with vampires, and 2 of those set PCs had spec'd from level 1 into fighting vampires, so they mopped up this encounter in under 2 rounds. This is what will happen with level 20 PCs. If you hit them with what they're really good at, they'll be really good at hitting it. You'll also have to look at your encounters going the other way. If they turn out to be too hard, things can deteriorate fast. One way to do this is have the encounter come in waves. So, more monsters show up at the end of every initiative. You need to keep a close eye on the players and how they're doing, and have the monsters stop showing up when it's getting to the point where they really, really need a break. Depending on the situation, I'll also sometimes put in an escape valve, something in case things go very badly. I'm more likely to do this in a narrative moment. In your final battle against the amassed forces of Lolth, I am more likely to have someone swoop in to save you and buy you a second chance at success. If you're just exploring the Demon Spire in Vinemarsh and you get in over your head, I won't send the cavalry because the whole world isn't at stake and you might need to learn to run away. But for this game, they had decided that they weren't going to pray to Deos to have Sariel restored until they needed her. They could bring a Solar onto the field the moment things started to go bad. While he definitely wasn't a long-term ally, the Necromancer King is a full Lich, and he doesn't want the Drow to win. So if things started to go too far south for the player characters, he may have shown up to pull them out of the fire for just a moment. With both those things in my back pocket, I still would have let the bad guys win in the end if it had come down to that. If they had needed one of those saves, I would have readjusted the remaining encounters if I thought they were out of balance, or blamed it on bad luck and gone on based on how I saw the dice falling. The fight would have become more narratively drastic. They obviously were no longer fighting them at the walls of the city, but now house to house fighting in the city. Things would have been more desperate, more innocents would have died if they had failed, and the final tone of the ending would have been darker. In an upcoming video, I'm going to talk about generational games, which I've had the privilege of running. Let me just say this. I will let a campaign end in a tragedy, if that's how the dice truly fall, for the sake of one of these, and I'll explain a bit more about that in an upcoming episode. But the world becomes more interesting when the bad guys win. Great example of this, halfway through Final Fantasy VI, or 3 in North America, I think is the number. The bad guys beat the good guys, and the game kind of starts over in a dark world. And it is absolutely fascinating to see what's happened because the bad guys won. So today, for Campaign Enders, we touched on a few things. Determining the scope of your game so you can work towards the ending. You want to introduce the villains and allies early on and keep player choice as part of the game as you work towards the ending you want to reach. You want your ending to include accumulation of your story and to wrap up all your loose ends. You want it to be challenging and satisfying, but a bad ending can still be very satisfying. So thanks for watching this. If you're interested in other stuff I've done, watch the Let's Play Walking Dead I did with Renarin, who killed my vampires far too easily in this campaign ender, so go watch him suffer there instead. If you're enjoying these, consider liking and subscribing. Alright, thanks. Bye.
Ba 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 ba.